Welcome to LiveDaf, your online Daf Yomi Shiur.
Shalom, welcome back to today's Daf Yomi Shabbos Daf Chaf Aleph. Right on top of the Amid, says the Gemara. Tanu Rabbanan, we learned in the Brayse. Called Elu she'amru ein madlikin behen b'Shabbos. All those materials that the Chachamim listed for us as being unsuitable to be formed as wicks and to be lit on Shabbos, for concern that these materials don't have the ability to maintain and support a steady, healthy flame. And we're concerned that perhaps the flame will falter and dim, and the person might be inclined to reach out, to adjust it, to tip the nair, to brighten the light, which is a malacha. Therefore, it may not be used. However, avol oisim and medura, one may use those materials to make a large fire, because in a medura, a large fire, this concern is not applicable, because a large fire consists of many pieces of fuel which continually ignite each other. So therefore, regardless of what materials are contained therein, there's no concern that the fire will falter. So he may make a medura, bein lischamim, connected, whether he's using it to warm himself up, opposite this medura, bein lishtamish la'oira, to use it for illumination, bein agabe karka, whether it's down on the ground, bein agabe kira, whether it's on top of a stove. V'lo asru, Chacham only forbade ella lasas mem psila l'nebervad. Chacham only forbade using these materials in forming a wick for a lamp. Continues the Gemara, v'lo b'shem nikik. So this was amongst those oils which were unsuitable for Shabbos. Says the Gemara, my shem and kik, what is this? Amar Shmuel shaltinu. I asked the chol nechusayama, to all the seafarers, what is this shem and kik? They told me, oif echad yesh. There's a specific bird, but karche ayam, in the cities of the sea, v'kik shmai, and kik is its name. And evidently they used the shem and the oil of this bird for illumination. So this is shem and kik. Continues the Gemara, Rav Yitzchak Beid Rav Yehuda Amar Mishcha de Kaza. What is shem and kik? It is cottonseed oil. Reish Lakish Amar Kikayin de Yaina. It is oil extracted from this plant called Kikayin de Yaina, which Hashem miraculously grew overnight in order to provide shade for Yaina Hanavi. Amar Rabba Bar Bachana Ledidi Chazal, actually saw that plant. Ledidi Chazal Kikayin de Yaina. Ulitz Luliva Adami. It appears similar to the plant called Sluliva. Umidefashki Ravi. It grows out of the moisture of the puddles. Val Pum Chanusa Madan Yosei, and they hang it in front of the doors, by the doors of the shops for fragrance and for shade. And indeed, from its seeds they extract oil. Ubanfoy, and under its branches Naichan called Briche de Marava. All the Briche, the Cholim, the sick people in Marava and Eretz Yisrael, they rest under the branches of this plant. Continues the Gemara, Amar Rabba, Psila Sham Chachamim, Ein Madlikim Ben B'Shabbos. All those psilas, all those materials that Chachamim listed as being unsuitable to be used for forming wicks on Shabbos. What is the reason for that? Mipnei She'or Misachsechas Ben, because the fire jumps around them. These wicks don't have the capability of maintaining a steady, healthy flame. Shmanim Sham Chachamim Ein Madlikim Ben. What about those oils that are disqualified? What is the reason for that? Because she'ein nimshachen achar psil, because they don't get properly drawn into the wick, and therefore the fire, the flame, is not a steady, successful flame. What's going to be in the following situation? If he takes one of those oils that are puzzle, and he puts into it, he adds, Mao, is he allowed to sheyitin l'soichan shemen kolshu v'yadik? Can he add some valid oil, some oil which is kosher, into this oil which is puzzle? By doing so, he enhances the performance of the other oil and enables it to be properly absorbed into the wick. So can he do that? Mao sheyitin l'soichan, is he allowed to add into those disqualified oils shemen kolshu, a proper oil, v'yadik, and light it in this manner? So perhaps it's mutter because in its current form it indeed will be properly absorbed in the wick. So what's the shaila? Mi gazrinan. Perhaps the Chacham make a gzera on concern that if they allow this, then he's going to use it in its pure form without adding the oil. Mi gazrinan dilma, perhaps asi lat luki bei nayu, that if you allow it with the oil, he's going to use it even without the oil. Or you're not concerned regarding that possibility, and there's no gzeira, and one certainly can use it once he adds kosher oil into the other oil. Amalei, the Rabbah says, certainly not. We cannot light it even when he added the proper oil. My time, what is the reason? Since in its pure form it's unsuitable, therefore we are geyser, we're concerned that if you allow it in this manner, he's going to use it in its pure form where it's certainly unsuitable. Esvei, so Abaye es Rabba Akasha, how could you say that it's usher to use it even after adding the oil? The Brisa seems to indicate otherwise. The Brisa says as follows: Korach dovar, if one wraps something, shemadlikim by a material which is kosher for wicks on Shabbos, so he wraps it on top of al gabe dovar she'emadlikim by. So he takes a kosher material, he wraps it around something which is puzzle. Says the Tanakam, e'madlikim by. Nevertheless, you may not light it in this manner. Continues the Brisa. In my father's home, they indeed would wrap a psila, proper kosher material, around a nut, which is certainly not suitable to be used as a wick. So they would wrap one around the other, and they would kindle it in this manner. Says the Gemara. So at any rate, it says madlikin. So Shimon Gamliel maintains that it's mutter once you join the kosher material with the non-kosher material. So this is the kasha that Abaye es Rabba. How can you say that when you add valid oil to the invalid oil, it is no good? This Brisa tells us, according to Shimon Gamliel, that once you wrap the suitable material, even to material that's not suitable, one may kindle in this manner. Amar Leis, Rabbi says, one second, Adamoisvusli, Shimon Gamliel, instead of asking me a kasha from the practice of Shimon Gamliel, who allowed it, why don't you bring me a raya from the Tanakama? Sayinu Tanakama. Tanakama maintains it's aser. So instead of bringing me a kasha from the second shita, you can actually bring me a raya from the Tanakama. Says Marolei Kasha, that's not difficult. Why did Abaye choose to bring a raya from Shimon Gamliel? Maiserav, because an act, a story, carries more authority, carries more weight. The fact that the household of Rav Shimon Gamliel's father conducted himself in this manner, they actually practiced this halacha, they allowed kindling the wrapped item, so this carries more weight. It's not merely an opinion stated by a Tana like the Tanakama. We see they actually followed through in practice with this heter. So this carries more weight, this is more authoritative, and therefore I brought a raya, a kasha, from that onto your shita. Says the one, kasha. Okay, at any rate, it's fair. It's a kasha that we see indeed that they allowed it. So this is a kasha to Rab, who prohibited it. Says the one, my lab lahadik. Are we not speaking about that they would wrap the material on top of the nuts and kindle them both together in that manner? Says more loy lahakpois. It wasn't meant to be kindled together. Loy lahakpois. It was meant simply to float the wick above the oil, so the egois was never lit at all, but rather it was used as a floating item. It was used to float the proper wick above the oil. So the hadlaka, the kindling, took place directly on the suitable substance. It was not a joint hadlaka on the egois and on the substance that was wrapped around it. He merely lit the proper psila. The egois was there simply to float it. So therefore, it's not a kasha from Shimon Gamliel onto Rabbah. If he was to go ahead and kindle and light both substances together, certainly that would be asur on account of the gzeira. Says Mar'ilid Hakfais. Okay, so if you're going to interpret the Brisa as referring to a case where simply the egois is being used as a float, my Tanakama, if so, why Tanakama prohibit it? He's not lighting the egois at all. He's lighting the wick, which consists of suitable material. Answers the Gemara. Kulo Rav Shimon Gamliel. Indeed, the whole Brisa was authored by Rav Shimon Gamliel, and went to reinterpret the Brisa as though it's missing some words. It's missing some words, and this is how it should be read. The Brisa begins by telling us, Karach Dovar Shemadlikim Boy. If one wraps a material which is kosher, Al Gabe Dovar She'emadlikim Boy, on top of another material which is unsuitable. Emadlikim Boy, indeed, he may not light both of them together, joined in this manner. And this is in accordance with Rabbi's opinion, that even if he adds kosher material, it is not suitable for adlaka. Continues the Brisa. When is this said? When is this Isser said? Lahadlik, when he's jointly lighting both materials together. Aval lahakpois, if he's merely using the unsuitable substance as a float, mutar, certainly that's okay. And the Brisa continues with this story. Shimon Gamliel Oimer, shall be sab, indeed in my father's home, they'll wrap the psila, the wick, on top of the egos, which is merely used as a float. So indeed, there's no machlekes. According to this interpretation, all agree that one may not use a material which is unsuitable for adlaka, even if he joins it with material which is suitable. The entire Brisa is actually Shimon Gamliel, who begins by telling us that halacha and continues by telling us that if he's merely using the other item as a float, like the egos, the nut, which is merely used to float the wick above the oil, certainly he's not lighting the egos, and of course, there's no gzeira, there's no problem there. Continues the Gemara, Eini, is that so? That even if one adds proper oil to the mix and enhances its performance and enables it to be properly absorbed into the wick, it still is not kosher. One may not light it on Shabbos. Eini, is that so? Va'amar of Bruna Marav. If you have fat that was dissolved, or innards of fish that were dissolved. So we have the molten fat, we have the kirvei dogim that were dissolved. Adam noisein l'seicha shemen kol shu madlik. One may add some kosher oil into this mix, and this enhances its performance and enables it to be properly absorbed in the wick, and umaldik, he may light it in its current form. So here we see that although, what is the halacha regarding chelev? We learned in our Mishnah that one may not use chelev whether or not it's molten. So even if it's molten chelev, if it's in a liquid form, it's still not to be used on Shabbos. Nevertheless, we learn here that once he adds some shemen, he's noising l'soichai shemen. By doing so, he changes the halacha, and it can be used on Shabbos. So this doesn't conform with the opinion of Rabbah. Answers the Gemara, there's a big difference. Hani, these two items, these two materials, these two substances of chelev and kirvei dogim, mimshichi beinayu, even when they're in their pure form, when we have molten fat, when we have dissolved kirvei dogim, they are suitable technically for adlaka as is in their pure form. However, Chachamim, as the Gemara soon will explain, the Chachamim made a gzeira that it shouldn't be used, and therefore only in its pure form you don't use it. But once he adds the oil, that certainly is machshir those materials for adlaka, and they're different than the other materials mentioned in the Mishnah, which are hani loy mimshach meinayu. All those other materials, like the pitch, like the wax, they don't get absorbed, they don't get attracted by the wick properly when they're in their pure form, and therefore even if he goes ahead and adds some oil, it's still asr. Why? Because as I mentioned earlier, there's a gzeira. If you're going to allow it when you add oil, then perhaps he's going to use it even in its pure form, and when it's in its pure form, it's certainly not suitable. It's lo mimshach beinayu. It doesn't get drawn after the wick. So this case is different. In the chelev or kirvei dogim, when they're dissolved and molten, they are nimshach beinayu. Says the Gemara, v'gozer rabbanon al chelev muhutach mishum chelev she'ein muhutach. However, even though technically speaking, fat which is melted, the innards of the fish, the kirvei dogim which are dissolved, even though technically speaking they're suitable, even when they're in their pure form without adding any oil, the Chacham made a gzeira, don't use it, on account of a concern that he might go ahead and use it when it is in a solid form. V'gozer rabbanon al chelev muhutach, on molten fat, mishum chelev she'ein muhutach, I'm concerned that he might go use solid fat, which is certainly unsuitable. The same thing about kirvei dogim, sheni moichu, on dissolved kirvei dogim, mishum kirvei dogim shelo moichu, I'm concerned that he might use it even prior to dissolving it. So that's a gzeira. The Chacham made a gzeira, don't use it even when it's dissolved. when it's really suitable, on account that he might use it when it's not dissolved. But once he adds oil, then certainly he may use it. Says Gemara, why? Let us apply the gzera there as well. This molten fat and the kiridogim that were dissolved, even though he puts oil into them, let's make a gzera and prohibit it. Why? On account of a concern that he might use it even without the oil. So why don't we make a gzera in this case as well? Says the Gemara, he goofa gzera. The fact that we don't allow him to use the dissolved fat and the kiridogim in its pure form, it's not because it's not suitable. As we said before, these two materials indeed are suitable. They get properly absorbed into the wick. Why then can't we use it? He go for gzera. That itself is because of gzera, as we said, because we're concerned that he might use it in its solid form. So that's already one gzera. Now in this case, that he takes the dissolved materials that are suitable as is, and he goes and he adds oil. That's already another stage. In order to prohibit that, that's an additional gzera. That's a double-decker gzera. You're going to prohibit the dissolved chalif with oil for concern that he might use it without oil. That's one gzera. What's wrong with using it without oil? Because he might use it in its solid form. That's another gzera. That's a double gzera. The Chacham never enact a gzera. So indeed, this is different than the other materials mentioned in the Mishnah, the other types of oils, which are unsuitable in their pure form. Why? Because they're not properly absorbed in the wick, and they can't maintain a steady flame, and we're concerned that he might reach out and adjust the flame on Shabbos, Shemayata. So that's a single isser. Now, to go ahead and add oil to that, and enable its use in that form, regarding that, the Chacham made a gzera. Don't use it, even with the oil. Even though now it's suitable, now it gets properly absorbed, the Chacham made a gzera. If we allow this, then perhaps he's going to use it in its pure form, which is certainly us. Ask the Teisus Yishanim, but isn't that also a gzera? What is the reason why you may not use these materials in their pure form? Because they don't get properly absorbed in the wick, and the flame might falter, he might reach out and adjust it. That is a gzera, shemayata. That's one gzera. Now you're enacting a second gzera on top of that. When he goes ahead and adds oil, says Rabbah, you can't use it. Even though now it's really suitable. It's a gzera, because if you allow it in this way, with the oil, perhaps he's going to go ahead and use it, even without the oil. And what's wrong with using without oil? Because then the flame is not steady, and he might reach out and adjust it. Gzera shamayata. So here too, there's a double gzera. It's a gzera. Says the Teisus Yishanim, this is not a gzera. Because when one uses materials that are not suitable for a healthy, steady flame, there's a very real concern, very real chashash, that on account of this unsteady flame, he's going to, out of habit, out of reflex, reach out and adjust it and brighten the flame. It's not merely a concern, a chashash, a far-flung concern. It's a very real concern. It's a very immediate concern. It is a vadai. The Teisus Yishanim calls it a vadai. He says it's impossible that he won't adjust the lamp. Therefore, that's not really considered to be a gzera. It's considered to be a vadai. When one uses unsuitable material, he's very close to doing a malacha. It's considered like a vadai malacha. Therefore, we understand that Rabbah tells us, just as we can't use the materials in its pure form because it's unsuitable for maintaining a proper flame, the Chacham made a gzera on that even with oil, you can't use it because there's a concern that it might use it in its pure form without oil. So in summary, those psilos v'shmanim, those various materials that are puzzle for Shabbos, if he added some oil into the material, into those unsuitable oils, and now enabled it to properly maintain its flame, here too Rabbah tells us it's usr. Why? A gzera, we're concerned Shema. He won't add oil, he'll use the material in its pure form. Therefore, they prohibit it even with the additional oil. The Gemara concluded there's a difference between those types of oils and the chela, the fat, and the kiridogim, the fish innards, that in their pure form, certainly one may not use it when they're solid, because they're not suitable, they're not properly absorbed in the wick, and there's the same gzera shamiyata. What about if they're melted, if they're dissolved? Chela muhuta, kiridogim shani moichu. There too, the Gemara told us it's aser, and this is a gzera that he might use it in its solid form. However, if he takes these melted, dissolved materials and adds some oil, in this case certainly it's mutter, because we don't enact gzera. We don't say, well, it's aser with the oil, for concern that he might use it without the oil. What's wrong with using it without oil? That itself is gzera, that he might use it in its solid form. Therefore we don't apply gzera, and it is mutter as long as he adds some valid oil into these substances. Continues the Gemara, Tani Rami Bar Chama. Psilos ushmanim shamar chachamim. Ein madlikim b'hem b'Shabbos, all those unsuitable materials for Shabbos. Ein madlikim b'hem b'mikdash. We might not use them for the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash as well. Why? Mishum shenemar lahalos ner tamid. We meant to be mala, to ascend the ner tamid on the menorah. And how do we see from here that these materials are not kosher? Continues the Gemara. Hu tanila vu amarla. Sram Bar Chama taught the brayso, and he expounded on it. How do we learn from this pasuk? Kedei sheitei shal eves olim eleh. The pasuk says lahales. The pasuk doesn't say lahadlik, to kindle, to light. Why does the pasuk use this unique term lahales, to elevate, to ascend? The pasuk is teaching us something, that the kindling of the menorah, the adakas has to be in a manner where the flame has the ability to rise up on its own without any additional assistance. It can't be that the flame will still need some help and adjustment and assistance. Therefore, we must use proper materials that have the ability to produce and maintain a clear, healthy, steady flame. Continues the Gemara Tanan. We learned in the Mishnah, from the worn out pants of the Kohanim, from their belts, they would tear apart and braid them, form them into wicks, and use them for kindling in the Beis HaMikdash. So we see clearly that one may use the Bigdei Kehuna, and we know that the belt of the Kohanim consisted of, some part of it was wool. And wool certainly is one of those materials mentioned earlier, which is unsuitable for making wicks. It doesn't have the ability to burn properly. So how can you tell me that even the Beis HaMikdash, there were these requirements of using these proper materials? Our Mishnah tells us that one may use even wool to be formed as a wick for the Beis HaMikdash. Says the Gemara, Simchas Beis HaShe'eva Shani. We're not speaking about the menorah here. That Mishnah is speaking about the celebration of Beis HaShe'eva, the all-night celebration of Beis HaMikdash, when they used to draw water from the well there. So they lit these fires, and they used the remnants, the worn out Bigdei Kehuna. So since it wasn't for the menorah, it was acceptable. Now Taisa asks a kasha. What is the Gemara's problem with the belts of the Kohanim? We know that the avnei, the belt of the Kohen, contained not only wool, it also contained flax, pishtan. So it's a combined wick of wool and flax. Now the Gemara before said that one may not combine the kosher and pasul materials together, but that's only on account of gzera. Nevertheless, Tosfos maintains that in the Beis HaMikdash, generally the Chacham did not apply gzeras. So what is the Gemara's kasha from the fact that they used this wool, flax material, since it contained flax as well? Answers Tosfos, but a majority, for the most part, it was wool. It was only a small portion of flax. It was 3/4 wool versus 1/4 flax, and therefore the flax, the pishtan, is batal. It's nullified, and it's considered to be a wool material, and certainly would not be suitable for the menorah. So the Gemara needs to answer that it was for Simchas Sheva, which was okay even when they used the wool wicks. Continues the Gemara Tashma, the Tani Rabba Ramasna. Let's take a look. Let's listen to this brayso. Tani Rabba Ramasna, Bigdei Kehuna Shabal. The Bigdei Kehuna that got worn out, Mafkin Oisam, they would tear them, Umeheno Yoisin, and they would use it for psilos lemigdash, for wicks of the menorah. So this wasn't Simchas Beis Sheva, this was actually the menorah itself. Ma'alav Tikalayim, doesn't it mean that they used the part of the begadim that was kalayim, that was consisted of wool and linen, meaning for instance, the belts? It says Malay, the boots. This Bryce is referring to the begadim made of pishtan, of flax. Certainly that was suitable to be used as wicks. So in conclusion, we have a list of various materials that are not suitable to be kindled on Shabbos, for Ner Shabbos, or for a personal use on Shabbos. However, a medura, to use it for a large fire, the Gemara tells us certainly that's mutter. There's no concern of shamayata. A large fire maintains its size and its health, and there's no concern. They don't need to adjust it and brighten it. The Gemara told us that for the menorah, one may not use these materials as well. Finally, the Gemara told us that's only to kindle the menorah, but for Simchas Beis Sheva, certainly there's no difference what materials they are using. Now, what about Neres Chanukah? So the Gemara will provide us with a three-way machlekes. Says the Gemara, Omar Avhuna, Psilois u'shmonem she'amru chachamim. Those wicks and oils the Chachamim listed for us as being unsuitable. Ein madlikim b'hem b'Shabbos, it can't be used on Shabbos. Ein madlikim b'hem b'Chanukah, they may not be used for Neres Chanukah as well. Bein b'Shabbos, whether we're speaking about Neres Chanukah for Shabbos, bein b'Kollel, or whether the weekday Neres Chanukah. Amar Rava, my time of the Rav Huna. What is his reason? Because he holds kafsa zakakla, that if a Ner Chanukah gets extinguished, kafsa zakakla, he's obligated to go and rekindle it. So since he has the obligation to look after the continuity of his flame, therefore initially he needs to provide the proper materials to ensure a proper, healthy, steady flame, for concern that perhaps the flame will go out and he'll neglect to relight it. Therefore he must use only suitable materials. This is another reason, as Rashi explains, this pertains specifically for Shabbos. Since there's a heter l'shtamish l'oira, the Chachamim, when they established the mitzvah of Chanukah, they allowed one to use the illumination, even for one's personal use. Therefore, if on Shabbos he's going to use the Ner Chanukah for his own personal use, so if the Ner consists of unsuitable materials and the flame is not a healthy, steady flame, he's going to have the gzera of shamiyata. He'll be inclined to reach out and adjust it. And therefore this is an additional reason to disallow using these unsuitable materials for Ner Chanukah when it is Ner Chanukah of Shabbos. So we have two reasons. One is kafsa zakakla. This applies to weekday and Shabbos. And the second reason, of which is based on the gzera of shamayata, this is specifically applicable to Shabbos. Rav Chizda Amar, no, madlikim and b'choil. The weekday Neres Chanukah can consist of any materials. Avalei b'Shabbos, but I agree regarding Shabbos. Why? Because Rav Chizda holds kafsa ein zakakla. If the Chanukah Ner goes out, gets extinguished, ein zakakla, he has no obligation to relight it, and therefore he may use any material that he wishes initially when he lights the Ner Chanukah. Ask the Beis Halevi, what is the connection between the two things? Surely, kafsa ein zakakla, if he lights it properly and has a good chance of enduring, but eventually for some reason it went out, it got extinguished, fine, he doesn't have the obligation of rekindling it, because he lit it properly. He lit a proper Ner Chanukah. How can you deduce from here that one may initially light the Ner Chanukah with inappropriate materials, which don't have a chance of enduring properly? Says the Beis Halevi, the connection is as follows. Just as we see that Chachamim would not mechayev him, did not apply such a great responsibility on the person to go ahead and look after his Ner Chanukah, even if it gets extinguished, to go ahead and rekindle and relight it. So we see that merely lighting it is sufficient for the mitzvah Ner Chanukah. As long as he lit it initially in a proper manner, he has fulfilled his mitzvah. Says the Beis Halevi, using these materials that are unsuitable for Shabbos, for Ner Chanukah, it doesn't mean that it's going to go out. It's not going to get extinguished. It's a remote. There's a remote chance. There's a chashash rochik that using these materials will result in an extinguished Ner Chanukah. Therefore, says the Beis Halevi, as long as he uses materials which have a reasonable chance of maintaining a flame which will endure, that's sufficient. So even these materials are sufficient for this purpose. Explains the Beis Halevi, that's the connection of the Gemara. Just as Kafsa and Zakuk, we find that the Chacham did not obligate him to that extent that he needs to go ahead and rekindle his lamp. As long as he lit it properly, he fulfilled his mitzvah. He doesn't have to go and ensure the continuity of the Ner Chanukah. Similarly, as long as he lights the Ner Chanukah initially in a manner which has a reasonable chance of enduring, he doesn't have to be concerned about the absolute guaranteed continuity of his Ner Chanukah. So this is the reason of Chizda, which allows using those materials during their Ner Chanukah b'choil of weekday. However, the Ner Chanukah of Shabbos is different. Why? Continues the Gemara, because he holds that he may use the illumination of Ner Chanukah for one's personal use, and therefore there's a chashash of shamayata. If the Ner Chanukah consists of materials which don't produce a steady flame, when he uses it on Shabbos, he might reach out and adjust the flame. So that is the pshat in the distinction of Rav Chizda. During the weekday, he may use any material. During on Shabbos, he may not. So these are two shitas. The Gemara presents us with the third shita. Omar Rav Zera, Omar Vasna, Omar Ramila, some say Rav Zera, Omar Rav. Psilo is Ishmanim, She'omar Chachamim, Ein Madlikim Ben B'Shabbos. All those materials, Madlikim Ben B'Chanukah, Bein B'Choil, Bein B'Shabbos. So he allows all across the board, Ner Chanukah may consist of those materials. Omar Rav Yirmiyah, my time of the Rav. Because Savar Kavsa Ein Zakakla. So number one, he holds there's no obligation to rekindle the Ner Chanukah that got extinguished. And as explained earlier, this is the same reason which allows him to use these materials initially when lighting the Ner Chanukah. So this is a time which pertains for the weekday as well as Shabbos. This is specifically for Shabbos. Since you cannot, Rav holds, one may not use the illumination of Ner Chanukah for one's own personal use. Therefore, on Shabbos, there's no chance of shamayata because he's not going to use the lamp for his personal use. And therefore, on Shabbos as well, there's absolutely no problem using any materials, and the Shabbos has the same din as weekdays. Continues the Gemara. Amru Rabbanon Kamei de Abai. So the Rabbanon related this pshat of Rav's shita. How come Rav allows using these materials b'choil b'Shabbos? So they gave this tam mishmei de Rav Yirmiyah, this reason that Rav Yirmiyah offered, as we just explained, because kafsein zakakla and also shtam shloira, they offered it to Abai, but like Kibla, he didn't accept it. The Farshim explained because he didn't agree to the concept of kafsein zakakla, so he didn't accept this reason. However, says the Gemara later on, ki asr Ravin, when Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael, and he related the same explanation in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, and then the Rabban offered that to Abai. Amru Rabban Kamei de Abai. They offered the reason to Abai, Mishmei de Rav Yochanan. This time it was the name of Rav Yochanan Kibla. This time he accepted it. Omar, now he exclaimed as follows: Izaka, if I would have been worthy, Garmirte Lishmaite Mikar, I would have learned this much earlier when it was told to me the name of Yirmiyah. Says Valgamra. What difference does it make if he accepted it then or he learned it now? In any case, at the end of the day, he accepted it and learned it. Says there is a difference. Nafkamina, legirsa de yankusa. The difference is that the study in one's youth is more effective. It's absorbed deeper into the system, endures longer, and therefore he was disappointed at the fact that he hadn't learned this, he hadn't absorbed this lesson earlier in his lifetime. And he waited only until now, which was later. So in summary, we have three opinions, three shites, regarding Neres Chanukah. The psilos or shmanim, those materials, which are unsuitable for Shabbos, can they be used for Chanukah? We have three shites. Rav Huna says that they cannot be used for Neres Chanukah, whether during the Chayil, and the reason is because Kafsa Zakakla, one is obligated to ensure the continuity of his lamp, and therefore we're concerned that if he uses these unsuitable materials, the flame might go out, and he might neglect to rekindle it. The reason for Shabbos is because mutalish tamash la'ira, one may use the illumination of Chanukah, and if the flame is not steady, he may go ahead and tip it and adjust it. According to Rav Chizda, the Ner Chanukah of Kollel can consist of these materials because he holds kafsa ein zakakla. Therefore, as long as he lights it initially with some reasonable chance of endurance, that is sufficient. However, on Shabbos that can't be used because he holds mutal shtamash loira, and he might go ahead and tip and adjust the lamp. According to Rav, both are permitted, whether Kollel, whether Shabbos, and the reason is because he holds kafsa ein zakakla. There's no obligation to rekindle the light. Therefore, he may use any material. On Shabbos he holds it's mutter because, in addition to the first reason, asal shtamash loira, one is not allowed to use the illumination of Chanukah for his personal use, and therefore there's no concern about an unsteady flame. He's not going to go ahead and use it for his own personal use, and therefore he won't have the inclination to go ahead and tip and adjust the flame. Continues the Gemara, v'kafsa in zakakla. Can you maintain indeed that if the Ner Chanukah gets extinguished, there's no obligation to relight it? We have a brisa which seems to tell us otherwise. Mitzvah, says the brisa, the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah begins from the point in time of Shetishka Achama, from sunset, ad shetichle regel ashuk, until the passerby vanish from the marketplace, because the point of Ner Chanukah is to provide pirsumenisa, to publicize the miracle of Chanukah. Therefore, the Chacham determined the time based on the presence of people in the marketplace. Says Gemara, my lav, is the brisa not referring to this case? The kav sahadag madakla, that if the Ner Chanukah goes out, he needs to reignite it. So the brisa is telling us that the Ner Chanukah needs to last from Shkias Achama up until Tichle Regel Mashuk. He must ensure that a flame is burning throughout this period, and if it goes out, he needs to relight it. Says Gemara, loy, that's not the correct interpretation. The brisa is merely telling us the loy adlik, if he hasn't yet lit madlik, he needs to light until the deadline of Shetichle Regel Mashuk. Now we're speaking about a case of the flame going out. There's no such obligation. V'inami, an ultimate pshat in the brisa is l'shiur, for the required measure of oil, the shiur, how much oil is he meant to put into the menorah, so that it'll last from shkias achama until tichle regel mashuk. But the brisa is not discussing a case of kafsa, whether or not he's obligated to reignite it. Now Tosfos points out, what if one delays past this deadline of tichle regel mashuk? So this depends on the two terutzim in the Gemara. According to the first teretz in the Gemara, it's a deadline. You cannot light Ner Chanukah past that point. According to the second teretz in the Gemara, it is not so. Therefore, one should light misafik. Continues in the Gemara, so what is this point of tichle regel mashuk? Ad shetichle regel mashuk va'ad kama. What time is this? Amar Rabba bar Chana Rav Yochanan adekalya rigla tarmadai, until these tarmadai people have vanished from the marketplace. Rashi explains these are people who used to collect and sell wood, and they would linger around in the marketplace until the homeowners would go home and check their wood supply and perhaps come back and purchase more. So these were the last people left in the marketplace, and the Chachamim determined the Zman based on them. Tana Rabbanan, mitzvah Chanukah, Ner Ishu Beisa. What is the basic obligation of the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah? It is one Ner Ishu Beisa per household. Those who pursued and wanted to fulfill mitzvahs on a higher degree, they lifted it up a notch. Ner l'chol echad ve'echad. One ner per person, per member of the household. Those who lifted it up even further, we have a machlekes between Sham and Yisrael how they are meant to conduct themselves. The first day, 8 candles. And as we proceed through the days of Chanukah, we deduct 1 per day. We begin with 7, go down to 8, go down to 7, to 6, etc. Just the opposite. The first day we begin with 1. As we proceed, we keep on adding to that number. First day is 1, second day is 2, until we conclude with 8 neris. Now, there's a machlekes rishonim how we're meant to conduct ourselves according to Mahadrin and Mahadrin. Now we know the Mahadrin will provide 1 ner for each member of the household. What about the Mahadrin min Mahadrin? They lit their neris corresponding to the days of Chanukah, whether it went from 8 to 1 or 1 to 8. Was it per person, per member of the household, or was it 1 per household? According to the Rambam, it was provided, a set was provided for each member of the household. According to Tosfos says it can't be so, because the fact that we light corresponding to the days of Chanukah, we're meant to make a heker, it's meant to be discernible that indeed they correspond to the days of Hanukkah. So if we're going to provide a set per member of the household, one will not be able to differentiate. There won't be any hecker which day of Hanukkah it is. He'll see a whole slew of neiros. He'll see 20 candles there. He won't know what day of Hanukkah it is. Perhaps there are 20 members in this household. Therefore, Tosfos says, although Mahadran would do one for each member of the home, however, Mahadran would provide one set for each household. Now, interesting, the Taz points out that in this case, the Ashkenazim and Sfaradim do opposite than their usual custom. In this case, the Ashkenazim follow the Rambam's Shita, who was a Sephardi, and the Sephardim follow the custom of Tosfos and provide only one set per household. According to the Shita, if they're following the Shita, Mahadran. Now the Maharal points out that how do we get around Tosfos' concern? How does the Rambam get around the concern that it won't be Nikar? What day of Hanukkah it is if you're going to provide a set for each member of the household? Says the Maharal, very simple. We take the menorahs and we place them at separate locations. So it is discernible. We see each menorah standing on its own, and we could determine, we can be makir and recognize which day of Hanukkah we are holding. Continues the Gemara, Amar Ula. Pligiba Tri Amoraim Marava. There was a machlokes, two Amoraim in Eretz Yisrael, regarding the reasoning, the tam of Beis Shammai Misil. It was between Rav Yosef bar Abin and Rav Yosef bar Zvida. Chad Amar, one of these Amoraim, explained the machlokes as follows. Time of the Beis Shammai Keneged Yom Nechnasim. Beis Shammai's calculation corresponds to the Yom Nechnasim, to the days of Hanukkah that are still yet to come. So the first day of Hanukkah, there are 8 days yet to come, so we start with 8. The next day, there are only 7 days that are expected, so we go down, etc. But time of the Beis Hillel Keneged Yom Hayotzim, that the days of Hanukkah correspond to the days of Hanukkah that are very past us. So the first day, 1 day passed, the second day, 2 days passed, etc. The other Amar explained as follows: time of Beis Shammai Keneged Parei Chag, that the days of Hanukkah correspond to the Karbanos, the Purim brought on Sukkot. There were 70 Purim in total, which corresponded to the 70 Ummah, 70 nations of the world. And they were arranged in a manner where they decreased the number. We began being makar on the first day 13 Purim. The next day it went down to 12, and so forth. So for some reason there is Hanukkah meant to correspond to that phenomenon. We should start with a high number and slowly decrease as Hanukkah proceeds. By the time of the Beis Hillel, the Malam B'Kodesh V'Meridin, Beis Hillel maintained one is meant to go up in matters of Kedusha. Therefore we begin with one and slowly ascend up the ladder until we conclude at the last day of Hanukkah with 8 neiros. Now the Maharsha points out that certainly Beis Shammai agree generally to the concept of Malam B'Kodesh V'Meridin. However, in this case it's different since there's a specific reason that requires arranging the neiros in this manner. Continues the Gemara. Amar Rabba Rav Chana Rav Yochanan. Shnei Zkeinu Yibetzina, 2 elders in Tzidan. Echad Asik Beis Shammai, one followed the opinion of Beis Shammai. Began with a large number, slowly decreased. Ve'echad Asak Di Beis Hillel, one did in a manner of Beis Hillel. It began with 1 and concluded with 8. Zen Oisin Tam L'Dvarav, Keneged Parei Chag. The one that followed Beis Shammai explained it to correspond to the Purim of the Chag, which decreased in number. Ve'zen Oisin Tam L'Dvarav, and the other one who followed Beis Hillel provided a reason of Malam B'Kodesh V'Meridin, so we meant to begin with 1 and conclude with a higher number because we went to ascend and rise in matters of Kedusha. So in summary, the mitzvahs Ner Chanukah has 3 levels. The basic mitzvah is Ner Shibesei, 1 Ner per household. The Mahadran lifted it up a notch and they provided Ner L'Chad Ve'echad, 1 per each member of the household. The Mahadran, Mina Mahadran, they went a step further, according to Beis Shammai. They began with 8 and were Peiches V'Hoilech, decreased as Hanukkah proceeded. What is the reason for that? We have 2 approaches, either because it was Keneged Yom and Nechnasim to correspond to the remaining days of Hanukkah that are yet to come. So we begin the first day with 8, Keneged the days that are yet to come. According to the other approach, it corresponds to the Parei Chag, to the Karbanos and Sukkos, which slowly decrease the number. The Shita Beis Hillel is, we begin with 1 and we are Moisef V'Hoilech, we add as the days of Hanukkah proceed. We have 2 explanations, or either It corresponds to the days of Chanukah that already passed us. So the first day, 1 day passed. The second day, 2 days passed. Or because of the concept of Malan B'Kodesh Meridim, when to ascend the matters of Kedusha. We begin with 1 and we conclude with 8. Continues the Gemara. Tan Rabbanon, we learned in the Bryce. Ner Chanukah, mitzvah la'nicha, al Pesach beisim b'chutz. Where is one meant to place Ner Chanukah? Al Pesach beisim b'chutz, on the outside of his doorway, so that it be seen by the people outside. If he's living up in the upper story and he doesn't have a place down on the earth below, so he places it opposite the window, where it's adjacent to Surabim and can be seen by the Bnei Surabim. Sakana, a time of danger, on account of the goyim, so we can't have our menorah visible. It's sufficient to simply place it on one's table. Amar Rava, in that case, he needs to kindle another ner for his private use. This way, it is nikar. He's indicating that the ner Chanukah is a ner mitzvah and is designated for that purpose only. And this will indeed make a person manes and publicize the miracle of Chanukah. But if he has a large fire present, then he doesn't need to kindle another ner because he's going to use the ner of the Medura. If he's a distinguished person, doesn't generally use the illumination of a menorah, in that case, therefore, in that case, he needs to kindle another ner in order to indicate that the ner Chanukah is not for private use, it is designated for mitzvah to publicize the ner Chanukah, the nes Chanukah. Continues to go on my Chanukah, on account of what nes, of what miracle did they establish the Yada of Chanukah? The Tana Rabbanan is learned in the Brisa. V'chafei b'Kislev Yomi de Chanukah, begin the days of Chanukah. Tamnayin, there are 8 days. The loyla mitzvah behind. One is not allowed to make a hesped, a eulogy on those days. If loyla sanas behind, not to fast in those days. Based on what? Because of the following story. When the Yivanim entered the Beis Hamikdash, timuk lashmanim, so they were metame all the oils. And when the kingdom of Beis Hashmonai gained the upper hand and vanquished the Yivanim, so they searched for some oil for the menorah and they only found 1 flask. They only found that was lying there with the seal of the Kohen Gadol, and it was apparent that it wasn't tampered with, and it remained the Torah, it could be used. However, it was only a small amount. It was only sufficient to be used for 1 day of the menorah. Nasa by Nes, a miracle occurred with Liku Menushmani Yamim, and it lasted for 8 days. Why they need 8 days? Explains the Maharsha. Perhaps the place of the where they pressed the olives was a couple of days away, and they needed 8 days to go get some new oil. Some say because they were tamei meis, and they needed 7 days in order to become purified, and only on the 8th day can they press the new oil, the Torah oil. Okay, so this was the nes. Continues the Brisa. L'shana acheres. The following year, when they recognized that the miracles contains an eternal value, kavam, so they established vasim yom tovim, and they enacted these days as yom tovim for halal v'ida, as Rashi says, to read halal and to say alanisim in v'ida, in the bracha v'ida during tefillah. So this was the account of the story of Ner Chanukah, and based on this, we have the Yom Tov of Chanukah, and the Farshim speak out that we celebrate Chanukah different than we do Purim. On Purim, it was a nes where Hashem delivered us from the Goyim who were threatening us physically. And therefore the celebration also takes on a physical form of Mishtivah Simcha. However, on Chanukah, we were threatened spiritually. And the nes was that Hashem saved us from a spiritual danger. And therefore, we celebrate accordingly with Hallel and Haidah, which are spiritual activities. Now, we all know the Kasha, the Beis Yosef. So why did they establish 8 days for Chanukah, since the oil was sufficient for 1 day, and the nes merely extended its life for another 7 days? So the nes was only a 7-day nes. So the Beis Yosef gives 3 tirutzim. Number 1, that they split the oil into 8 parts, so that it lasts for 8 days. And the nes was that even the first day, which only contained a small amount of oil, the flame endured and last for the full time. Another teretz is that when they poured the oil into the menorah, the full oil into the menorah, the next day they saw that the cups of the menorah were full and hadn't really consumed anything. So it was a nace even on the first day. Another teretz is that when they poured the oil from the flask into the menorah, they noticed that the supply in the flask has not decreased in any manner. So the nace occurred right then and there on the first day. Continues the Gemara, Tanan Hasan, we learned in the Mishnah. Gates hayitim tachas apatish. A spark that flies out from under the hammer, for instance, the hammer of a blacksmith, v'yotzav v'hizik, goes out and does damage. Chayav. So he's liable, he's chayav for the spark that he sent out. Gomoshton, pishton, a camel which is loaded with flax. Voy v'shesarabim, and is passing by in the shesarabim. V'nichnas pishtonoi l'seichachanus, and the pishton, the flax, the load, protrudes makes its way into the shop. V'dolko b'ner shel, and catches fire from the candle of the shopkeeper. V'hilik esabira, and sets the whole huge building on fire. Balagomol chayav. So the camel owner is chayav because he shouldn't have allowed his load to enter the shop and catch fire from the candle. However, hiniach chavani es ner bachutz. If the shopkeeper placed his ner outside, in that case, chayav, he's liable because he was negligent. Why did he leave the candle outside? Rabbi Doimer, there's one exception. B'ner Chanukah pater. If this candle wasn't an ordinary ner, it was ner Chanukah, he is pater because it's a ner of mitzvah, so the shopkeeper is pater. Perhaps, in this case, the camel owner should have looked out for the ner Chanukah, which was placed outside in Shusarabim. So the shopkeeper is pater, and the Baal HaGomel is chayiv. Amar Ravina, we can conclude from this halacha, Zaysemeres, apparently, ner Chanukah mitzvah lanicha b'sei chasara. It is a mitzvah to place ner Chanukah within 10 tefachim of the ground, because when he places it there, it's indicative of its nature, that it's meant as a ner mitzvah to publicize the nace, because generally speaking, when one places a lamp for his own personal illumination use, he doesn't place it so close down to the ground. So we see from this Mishnah as well that there is a mitzvah to place it very low down. Why? How do we see from this Mishnah? If it is perfectly acceptable to place ner Chanukah high up, so why is the Baal HaNer, why is the shopkeeper who places the ner outside, why is he exempt? Why is he pater? Because it's a mitzvah. He should have raised the ner Chanukah up high up. So the Baal HaGomel, the camel owner, should debate and should challenge the shopkeeper and tell him, why did you place it so low? You should have placed it way up in the air, higher than the level of a camel on his rider. So you're liable, you're responsible, you're negligent for placing it so low. Apparently, says Ravina, we learn from here, it's a mitzvah to place it low down. Says Dilma, perhaps that's not the case. There's no mitzvah to place it low down. So why then is the Baal HaChanus, the shopkeeper, pater? Because what is the Baal HaGomel telling him? You should have placed it high up. The Chacham were concerned that if you're going to burden him too much, he will come to neglect and avoid doing the mitzvah altogether. Therefore, the Chacham did not oblige him to raise the ner Chanukah up beyond the level of the camel and the rider. So therefore, since he is performing a mitzvah, he is pater. So you have no right from here that there's a mitzvah to place it low down, even if there's no such mitzvah. Nevertheless, the Chacham did not obligate him to raise the ner Chanukah. They were concerned that he will neglect doing the mitzvah altogether. And since he is fulfilling divrei Chachamim, he's been mekayim the mitzvah in the manner that he's doing it, he is indeed pater and not liable for the damage incurred as a result of his candle. Perhaps we'll take a quick summary of today's daf. We began with the halacha of psiles and shmanim that are not suitable for Shabbos, and the Gemara told us that for a medura, for a large fire, one can use all these materials. There's no concern that he'll go ahead and tilt and adjust the large fire. We are sure and certain that the fire will proceed successfully. The Gemara proceeded by giving us the various explanations for Shem and Kik. One of them is that it's the oil extracted from the seeds of Kikayin Diyaina, the plant that Hashem grew for the sake of Yoina, to provide him with shade. The Gemara proceeded with the halacha of adding oil into those shmanim, those oils which are unsuitable for Shabbos. Is that allowed? So Gemara tells us as follows, that the psilas and shmanim, which are pasal for Shabbos, are asr because shamayata, because he might go ahead and adjust the lamp. And even when he places oil, and he adds oil and enables it to be absorbed properly in the week, it's still asr. As Rabbi told us, it's a gzeira. Gzeira that sometimes he might not add oil. Zivul Chacham prohibited it in any case. However, the Gemara concluded that regarding chela, fat, and kivri dogim, the innards of fish, so if they're in their solid form, it's asr, because they don't burn properly. And there's gzeira shamayata. If they're dissolved and melted, in that case, it's also asr, even though certainly they are suitable because they are properly absorbed in the wick. However, there's a gzeira. If he uses them in their molten state, perhaps he's going to use them in their solid form. However, the Gemara concluded, if he were to add some oil into these molten items, in that case, certainly it's mutter, because the Chacham did not apply gzeira. So we mentioned their Shabbos. One may not use these materials for their Shabbos. For Medura, it is suitable. For Menorah, it's not suitable because the pasuk tells us lahalois ner tamid, the flame must rise on its own. It must be a successful, steady flame. However, for the simchas beis ha'sheyeva, indeed, any type of material is suitable. The Gemara proceeded regarding Neres Chanukah. According to Rav Huna, it is not permitted whether it is bechayil, weekday or Shabbos. Why? Because number one, he holds kafsa zakakla. If the flame would go out, he needs to relight it. Therefore, he must use proper materials that produce a steady, healthy flame, so that he ensures that the flame does not go out. For concern that if it does, he might neglect to relight it. There's an additional reason which pertains to Shabbos, since one may use the Neres Chanukah for his own personal use. There's a concern that if he uses materials that don't produce a steady flame, he's going to adjust the flame on Shabbos when he uses it. Therefore, one may not use these materials for Neres Chanukah altogether. According to Rav Chizda, it depends. During the Chayil Ner Chanukah, he may use it because he holds kafsa ein zakakla. There's no obligation to relight the candle. Therefore, as long as he makes a reasonable attempt at lighting Ner Chanukah with material which has a reasonable chance of enduring, that is sufficient. However, on Shabbos, there's a concern that if he uses these unsuitable materials which produce an unsteady light, he's going to adjust the light because he can use it for his personal use. According to Rav, in any case, one may use any material for Ner Chanukah. Number one, he holds kafsa ein zakakla. One doesn't have the obligation to ensure the continuity of the flame. And number two, on Shabbos it is prohibited. He holds that Ner Chanukah is not meant to be used for personal use. Therefore, there's no concern that he's going to tip the lamp on Shabbos because he may not use it for his personal use regardless. So the Gemara told us that the amount of Neres Chanukah is 3 levels. We have the basic mitzvah ner yishu, one per household. The Mahadran will lift it up a notch and provide each member with a separate ner. The Mahadran and Ahadran, they lit their Chanukah licht based, corresponding on the days of Chanukah. According to Beis Shammai, they begin with 8, conclude with 1. According to Beis Hillel, begin with 1, conclude with 8. And what is the Zman of Adlakas Ner Chanukah? The Gemara tells us from Shkiyas Achama, and it extends up until Kalya, Rigla, the Talmudai, until the Talmud people who used to collect and sell wood are still present in the marketplace. Where is one meant to place his menorah? The Gemara gives us 3 options. Firstly, al Pesach Beis Machus, on the outside of one's door, where it can be seen by the passerby. If he's living up in the Ali, up in the upper floor, he places it near the window, which is adjacent to Rishus Rabim. In a Shasas Akana, time of danger, one merely places it on his table, Vidaya, and that's sufficient. They want to conclude by telling us, according to Yehuda, one who places his Ner Ribachutz outside Rishus Rabim, he's pater and not liable on any damages which result since he was doing a mitzvah.